Should you pull for Edgar's FR and BT? His roles are Mixed Attacker, Debuffer, and Weapon Imperil. His notable attacks, we're starting with Auto Crossbow Plus. His skill 1, it deals 5 split HP attacks. It deals Weakness Brave damage to machines. It inflicts Group Royal Pressure for 6 turns. That's going to be his main debuff. It gives a Brave Sap of 10% of Edgar's max Brave, and it also makes all of Edgar's attacks upgraded to their plus version. Lastly, it is high turn rate. Drill Plus, his skill 2, it is 6 HP attacks with 180% splash. It deals Weakness Brave damage to machines. It inflicts Group Pressure for 6 turns again. And finally, like his skill 1, it is high turn rate. Chainsaw Plus, his EX, it is 7 HP attacks with 180% splash. It inflicts Group Royal Pressure for 6 turns. It grants his buff Machinery for 6 turns, in which he retains 20% of Brave on all of his HP attacks. Royal Shock Plus, his LD, it is 5 split HP attacks. It ignores defense. It inflicts Group Royal Pressure for 6 turns. It gives 1 free ability use. It grants Debilitator for 12 turns on the enemy. It inflicts weapon weaknesses for 4 turns according to the weapon attack type he's using. So for example, if you use a melee attack with Edgar, you inflict a melee weakness onto the enemy for 4 turns. You inflict a ranged attack, ranged weakness. You inflict a magic attack, magic weakness, yada yada yada. His LD also grants 3 levels of Bio Blaster usage count, in which it upgrades his HP attack to Bio Blaster. And lastly, with his LD, it is instant turn rate. Bio Blaster Plus, his LD variant of his HP attack, it is 5 AoE HP attacks, ignores defense, it reduces 1 level of Bio Blaster usage count, it increases his EX gauge by 20%, and it lastly inflicts Group Royal Pressure for 6 turns. Air Anchor, his BT, its effect lasts for 8 turns. You have a party HP cap up of 30%, and it inflicts a very special debuff onto the enemy. It's called Move and You're Done for 1 turn, in which the boss's Brave damage and HP damage is reduced by 100%. Yeah, after the enemy takes a turn with this debuff on, it triggers his trap. Air Anchor, his BT trap, it is 6 HP attacks, it cancels the target's break, and it also inflicts break. It ignores defense, and that particular trap has an HP cap up of 200%. Pretty good trap, if you ask me. His force conditions, you're getting a 40% when you're dealing weak weapon damage, and for his second condition, you get a 5% per debuff whenever anyone's acting. The maximum of this condition would be 40%. Edgar's pros. If you haven't noticed already, Edgar is a aficionado of debilitating the enemy. He has Poison Sap, and he has a lot of other debuffs that cripple the enemy as well. And not to mention, we got to talk about his BT debuff, lowering Brave damage and HP damage by 100%. That's crazy. Say goodbye to HP threshold attacks. It's not gonna work. Well, it might work a little bit, but it's definitely not gonna kill your team, that's for sure. It's very, very strong. It's not on the level of like Raijin, Reno's Pyramid debuff, but it's still pretty damn good. Edgar is one of the only units in the game that really utilize Weapon Imperil. Some other units use Weapon Imperil like Orin with melee. However, no one can inflict all 3 onto the enemy like Edgar can. The great thing about Weapon Imperil is you don't have to rely on any sort of elemental enchant. You don't have to worry about lowering the enemy's elemental weakness and then also having to party enchant somehow. You don't have to do that. If all of your units naturally do a certain weapon type damage and Edgar inflicts it on the enemy, your entire party's dealing weakness damage without needing an element. If you're fighting in lockouts, Edgar's ability of Weapon Imperil can be very useful. And last but not least, the final pro, his FR conditions are easy to accomplish. Nothing else needs to be said. Moving to Edgar's cons. He straight up sucks if you can't debuff the enemy. If they cleanse a lot, or if they just have debuff immunity in general, don't bring Edgar. He's trash. Straight and simple, he's bad. But the problems really don't stop there. If the boss you're fighting buffs themselves a lot, Edgar has no way of dispelling that. You have to look elsewhere if you want someone to dispel. Edgar is good at one thing and one thing only, debuffing. With Edgar, like other debuffer units similar to him, he only really works best in offensive teams. The enemy shouldn't be taking a lot of turns whenever you're using Edgar. It's also given the fact that his BT debuff only lasts 1 turn. As strong as the trap attack is, and it's a very strong trap, you really don't want it to go off. You really want that extra insurance, especially with HP threshold attacks, and the enemy doesn't necessarily take a turn, but they do attack you regardless. Another con with Edgar, his damage is good, but it falls slightly short compared to the other units that have been coming out. With Balthier and his follow-up attack, enormous amounts of damage. With Mog, you're doing enormous amounts of damage with his follow-up attack. I don't know why Edgar doesn't have a follow-up attack. It makes complete sense for him to have one. Even Sarah has a follow-up attack, and she's a debuffer just like him. He doesn't have one, so unfortunately his damage is gonna fall short slightly. Granted, he's not meant to be your DPS unit anyway. He's supposed to be your third party, but a little extra damage from a follow-up attack wouldn't hurt anyone. Unless the problem with his debuffs in general, some of the miscellaneous debuffs that Edgar inflicts on the enemy isn't framed. If the boss buffs themselves, not only is Edgar not able to dispel it, but some of his debuffs can actually be pushed off because they're not silver framed, and you're not able to manually make them framed like you can with Sarah. The best remedy for that would realistically be just look for other people's debuffs along with Edgar's. My should you pull rating for Edgar is going to be an A+. He's a very interesting character, safe to say. My favorite part would be the weapon imperil. That to me, along with the BT debuff, by far the most useful things that he brings. And I do think that because of that, he's able to enable damage in a very unique way. He's not a necessary character at all in my opinion, but if you already have big roster and you want to branch out a little bit, or if you want to have a little bit of fun, I think he's a good pick to pull on. Thank you guys so much for watching with me. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!